Great. All right, I guess we're off to the races. Welcome to the BPM Speaker Series, presented through the Black Professionals in Music program and in partnership with Black History Manitoba. If this is your first time watching this series, it features influential speakers sharing their career journeys and lived experiences working in the music business, showing different career paths. So the Black community here in Manitoba has had immeasurable impact on the music and culture, really across the globe, as well as the impact that they've had here in Manitoba. Every day we listen to music created by Black producers and inspired by Black artists, yet Black artists still face discrimination and barriers within the industry. So dismantling these barriers begins with recognizing the need for Black music professionals to have their own specific spaces within the industry. So in February of 2021, BPM was launched, built to support Black music professionals in Manitoba. It offers regular sessions for participants to meet and network, join discussion groups, and learn from one another. Participants can bring ideas, share their professional needs, barriers, and influence the future direction of the program. Obviously, this is the third installment of our speaker series. And we have a very, very special guest in Dalton Higgins. He's a PR strategist, a publicist, author of 6 books. He's a festival producer, national magazine award-winning print journalist, TV, radio, podcast personality, Toronto Metropolitan University's music professionals music professional in residence. So he's really kind of done it all in terms of being in the music industry. He's worked with some of the biggest acts and artists you can imagine, both in Canada and around the world. So this is really like a very, very special guest here that we have here today. So he's going to drop some knowledge, tons of nuggets. This is one of the most interesting people I've ever met, and was one of my first interviews ever. So this really is a pretty big deal. But before we get into anything, I want to take a moment and recognize that Manitoba is on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the OJ Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples. And this is the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the truths and harms and mistakes of the past and present. And we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I want to send a big thanks to Factor for making the BPM Speaker Series possible. So also want to thank the Black History Manitoba for partnering on this. Also, we want to thank Advance for supporting BPM and the series. Huge supporters of this entire thing, and wouldn't be possible for us to have these conversations and open up the space for Black voices to really help mentor and guide and really drop some knowledge on us. So without their support, this wouldn't be possible. So I think with that, it makes sense for us to jump into things. Dalton?
Hi.
You with us? There we go. How's it going, man?
Hey, Andrew. How's it going?
I am doing well. Oh, man. It's incredible to see you, man.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I don't think I've seen you in person, in the flesh, in quite some time. Because, because the people that aren't from where you're from, the Lytics, man, you guys you were part of a wicked hip-hop group there, you know what I mean? That you guys have played. Yeah, you guys have toured everywhere, so, so yeah.
Great. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a funny story, when I kind of think about how we got going. I think you're sort of a big part of it, right? Like you were one of our first interviews and a massive inspiration. And I remember sitting down and thinking like, damn, Dalton Higgins, that's the man we need to get to know further. So definitely part of the beginning of my career in the music industry. And it kind of leads me to the first thing I just want to talk to you about is a little bit about your origin story. Like you're a publicist, obviously PR professional, you TV personality, you've kind of done it all. You're a teacher, you've written books. I'm curious, like what got us to this point? What was the impetus or that thing that got you rolling and got you started? We all have one. I'm curious where this all got going for you.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, it's interesting. When people ask you this question, like what do you do or what are you all about? What are you working on? I think I'm like a textbook. They call like a multi hyphenate
Mm,
or polyglot.
got it. Yeah.
Or even serial entrepreneur. Like
Yeah.
I'm one of these humans, Andrew, that once I think I've achieved a bit of mastery over any one particular subject or thing, I get bored with it and then I move on, looking for
Mm,
other things to conquer. Like if I'm to be honest,
yeah.
right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
so as I was, we were talking off air there. My background is as a journalist. So like a formerly
Mm,
trained journalist, and I grew up, was born and bred in Toronto, and in a household that is super literate. So my mother, she devours, like she reads like there's no tomorrow, newspapers, magazines, books. So when I was young, as a young child in Toronto and teenager and preteen, like I always had this a broad, vast, like a broad vocabulary, because my mother's we're always reading stuff, books, thick mounds, textbooks. We're just reading all this, consuming literature. So that in high school now, you're in high school and you take different classes. You take history, social sciences, geography, biology, math, whatever, chemistry, and English literature now, because my household is as literate. Literature literacy is huge within my household. My parents came here from Jamaica in the late '60s. So in English literature, yeah, exactly. Oh, we get a bit of bum, exactly, George.
Yeah. 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 Had to do it. You can't hear anything about Jamaica without throwing something up.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
That's the rule, right?
No, 100% across Canada, across the world, and
Yeah.
but anyways, yeah, no. So I'm studying, English literature in high school, and I'm always outperforming my classmates, my peers at some pretty competitive high schools here, that are good academic schools. Always getting 99%, 100% in English literature. Now, in other subject areas, I'm not faring as well, obviously, but 70s or whatever. But in English literature, I'm pretty much always a top student, consistently throughout my academic career. So what that meant, a teacher pulled me aside and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about studying English literature or something having to do
Mm,
with the media industries or communications?" And that's what I did. I went to school called York University in Toronto, and studied English literature and mass communications, which is a media program as a double major, which
mm,
involves the worlds of media, television, radio, film, print, newspapers, magazines, all that type of thing, right? So,
mhm,
so that's kind of where it started. And then university, what I like to tell, I mentor a bunch of youth out here in Toronto, a bunch, and they can call me anytime. I have an army, you know what I mean? A miniature army out here, Andrew. A bunch of youth that hit me up anytime. I give them free advice, pro bono. And what I tell them is, take advantage of the thing. What I did is I volunteered a lot. I did a lot of volunteering, man. So I volunteered at the community radio station, CHRY 105.5 at York University. I volunteered with a student newspaper, Excalibur, at York
mhm.
University. So I did a lot of that. So I had a lot of work experience while still in my first and second year at university. I would have written a bunch of stories, produced a bunch of radio shows by the time I'm in my second year at university, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, you know what? Like, I think one thing that is always fascinating to me when you see someone that's technically trained in something, like you're technically trained as, I guess a journalist or in communications. Um, it's always interesting to me when you have something, because it's like, okay, I'm gonna go to school, I'm gonna become a journalist, I'm hopefully gonna work for a newspaper or something of that kind. It's always interesting to me when someone ends up in something like music. Like, where did the switch happen, or what really took you into the music and like took you down that path? What was the thing?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, great question. I also, while growing up in Toronto, I grew up in this neighborhood that is affectionately referred to as Little Jamaica.
Mm,
And so, what that means is in this neighborhood in the northwest part of the city of Toronto, Toronto's a large city, like some of people tuning in are in Manitoba, Winnipeg, different parts of the province, and even across Canada. But Toronto it's the most multicultural city in the world,
Yeah.
and Toronto is also the fourth largest city in North America. All right, so it's a large city. So
I thought it was the fifth.
yeah, it fluctuates fourth and fifth. I think it's like
yeah.
but it's always New York, LA, Chicago, Washington, Toronto, right? But it's a massive city.
Yeah, it's
And
huge.
so what that means is there's a pretty sizable Caribbean community, and also and a growing continental African community, and but there's a large Jamaican community here. And I grew up as sort of in the epicenter of Jamaican culture. And what that meant is now, while a lot of students are out there hanging out at the mall or wilding out in the middle school years, public school years, I'm hanging out at record shops. Okay, so there's a record store called Monica's Beauty and Supplies. Well, it's called Monica. They do cosmetic beauty supplies, but it's also record shops. I grew up there, hanging out in the basement and in a record store, right? So here's the thing. I was born in the 70s. I'm not that old, but I'm like a bit of a walking encyclopedia on music because I grew up in record stores. You know what I'm saying? When other people are hanging out at the mall or doing whatever, like I'm in record stores like every day, right? So if you tell me about songs from the 70s, 60s, 50s, 80s, like it's all in my brain because I was in a record store every day, So that's kind of what led me. So now as a journalist, now I'm like, okay, I know a lot about the Black music tradition from the continent, whether Afrobeats, Fela Kuti over to Trinidad and Tobago, Mighty Sparrow, Calypso Rose, over to obviously early hip hop, Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5, Sugar Hill Gang, right? Over to electronic, over to, whatever it is, house music, whatever you're into from Detroit, Chicago. Like it's all in my brain, bro. I grew up in a record store, so nobody could talk to me about the history of Black music, bro. It's all it is.
Yeah. That's awesome. So it's like you go to school for journalism, you grew up in this record shop, so you're kind of like developing this understanding of music and culture and I guess popular culture in general, right? So now you have these two things. Was there like a mentor? Did you run into someone that was like, yo, Dalton, come work for me over here? Or was it like, did you stumble into something?
Here's the thing. That's actually my cheat code, is that I've always had great mentors, right? So, we would call like OGs.
Tribal mentors, yep.
Oh, 100%. So, there's this African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child.
Yeah.
So me, I've always had a village around me. So I always have an army around me. You know what I mean? Growing up is from my teen years to 20s, 30s, and for like 100% people that I lean on. So a lot of the tricks of the trade, as far as in the media industries and the music industry, I got from OGs, right? It's not, I didn't, because it's kind of like this. I was never so much interested in reinventing the wheel. When you have at your disposal, perhaps somebody who's 20 years older than you, that's kind of been there and done that. Why am I going to try to feel my way? Like if I want to, for example, I can shout out some people too, Norman Otis Richmond. He was somebody he's from Oakland, California, and he came to Toronto, basically fleeing America because he didn't want to get drafted to go to war. And he's an influential radio personality out here in Toronto. And he's a reporter, a journalist, and he'd done a lot of work at the community radio. But Norman Otis Richmond, I was hanging out with guys like that in my early university years, and he's like a musicologist. So when people talk about, hey, I heard about James Brown or Sly and the Family Stone, like he's met all of them, or interviewed all of them. So those are my mentors. There's another guy, Clifton Joseph. He'd worked at the CBC, Canadian Broadcast Corporation, for many years, and he's one of the first dub poets in Toronto and Canada. So dub poets. So I have all these. So I have a ton of mentors and OGs around me. That's my cheat code. So I'm able to expedite a lot of processes. People trying to figure things out, trying to maneuver and navigate the media and music industries. Me, I have people 20 years older than me. You know what I mean? That kind of taught me, told me the ropes, took me under their wing, and said, "Hey, this is how you do things." And also, too, this is how you, as far as making money as well. You know what I mean? I learned some tricks of the trade of how to, you know what I'm saying? As far as, some boss moves, to make money, generate revenue,
I think that's one of the most interesting things. Like, obviously, this is, Black professionals in music was really, obviously, it's the majority of people that get into the music industry aren't acting as artists, right? They're all the things that support artists, right? Publicists, journalists, promoters, and whatnot. And it just kind of like makes me go that, when eventually, not eventually, but there's the majority of people aren't going to end up making it as artists. And I think that was kind of like one of the things that really inspired me to work with Manitoba Music to get this whole thing going, because it was like, okay, well, how do we put the goods on the table, or teach people all those other skills, or give them that like baseline knowledge for that sort of transition into the next part of their lives or careers or whatever. I think it's really interesting that you kind of point out that one of the key things for you was building that tribe of mentors, or that group of people that help you kind of transition softly into, or what that helped you get into the thing. And so for me, there's a bunch of young artists who hopefully will watch this and learn something and take something from it, and they're going to have to figure that out. How do you go about, particularly as a Black person, how do you go about creating that tribe that's gonna help support you, and also just speak a little bit more about the importance of it?
Yeah, totally. Well, what I did, in the early stages of my career, there was so I read a lot of books. I'm going to be making a lot of literary references, so people take notes. These are some just good pieces, good books. So a book I read in university, Miles Davis, the autobiography of Miles Davis. It's called Miles. All right. And that book is just it's a critical seminal piece of literature tied to music, race, culture, pop culture, and making it in America as a musician, as a music enthusiast. And Miles Davis, in one of the chapters, he talks about this idea of being in the mix. All right, in the mix. Now, what he means is when he left St. Louis. I don't know, St. Louis, Missouri, which is St. Louis. I have this funny St. Louis stories, like the rapper Nelly. You know what I mean? Country Grammar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, like I did Nelly's first interview for the Source magazine. Right. So the Source.
Crazy.
Yeah. So the Source magazine, which is was considered the Bible of hip hop culture.
Yeah.
For those people that are into hip hop. So I flew out to St. Louis, and this is when he was not that well known, but the first interview you ever did with the Source, I'm the guy that did it. And then a year later, he had the biggest selling record in America. So like I think 11 million records or something like that. Like some crazy, right?
Crazy.
But anyways, Miles Davis talked about this idea of, so he's not going to stay in St. Louis where there's not a vibrant, thriving jazz music scene. So he went to New York. All right. And it's this idea, Andrew, where you can't, if you're let's say I'm in Sault Ste. Marie, I'm in Timmins, I'm in Saskatoon or whatever, and let's say I want to be a basketball player, and there's no basketball scene in Saskatoon. Well, you can't play basketball on an ice hockey rink. You understand? So you have to go to where the basketball courts are at. All right. So that's the idea of being in the mix. So you have to be very nimble and mobile. Okay, so if you are a reggae music artist, or you do dancehall or Afro beats, and let's say you're in Winnipeg, you're gonna have to find some way to connect to that community of Afro beats artists that might be outside of Manitoba sometimes. Those networks, build those networks on social media, invest in yourself, bet on yourself, take a couple trips to those Afro beat centers, or wherever there's a dancehall or reggae center if you're into reggae music. So that's super key, right? You have to be in the mix, right? So sometimes it might mean being a bit mobile, all right? And that's what I did, Andrew. I actually, because I had an intense interest in Black music and culture, and being a music industry practitioner and in the media arts, things really took off for me when I actually got the hell out of Dodge. When I started hanging out in New York and Chicago, if I'm to be perfectly honest with you, because when you're in those types of environments, out here, some parts of the music industry in Canada feels like we're stuck in the 90s, bro. I got to keep it real. When you go to New York at a young, these is, my young formative years, hanging out, let's say in Chicago, and people, let's say Oprah Winfrey. I remember going to Chicago as a 22-year-old and hanging out in Chicago, South and North Michigan Avenue, and seeing Oprah Winfrey Studios, Harpo. It's called Harpo, in Chicago, and she pretty much owned the block, bro. So imagine like a long block that stretches for like a couple miles. She owned the whole block. Like it was insane. Yeah, owned it. And the staffers reported to her. The managed people in positions of authority, they all look like you and I. They're all African American, and she owned the whole block. Then down on South Michigan Avenue, Then you have a publishing company, because I'm into literature, I'm into magazines, newspapers, and you have something called Johnson and Johnson Publishing, and these are the publishers of, magazines like Ebony Magazine, Essence Magazine, Jet Magazine, and you just see African Americans everywhere, bosses making boss moves, owning a ton of the real estate out there. So that's what greatly informed me, if I'm to be perfectly honest. It's not even so much in my backyard; it's hanging out in New York City, Harlem, Uptown, Brooklyn, and then also Chicago in my formative years. That's where I really got bigger visions. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Like you kind of bring up something that's really interesting to me, because there's sort of this idea that I've always kind of had some confliction with, right? The idea that you need to leave your city to figure it out, right? To like make it happen. And I think like there's a lot of truth. There's tons of truth to it. But I always wonder, like, now with the internet and with the ability to go on, hit someone up on Instagram or use SoundCloud or whatever, like you can sort of build a community online, but is it quite the same as getting up and moving? Like, do you need to make that move, in your opinion? Particularly you, right? Who's A, speaking from experience, B, who is a publicist and has worked with artists and are a journalist and has kind of helped create the media culture and culture in general. Like, do you need to just get up and move to go make it happen? Or can you do it via Instagram, via SoundCloud, via email, Snap, Zoom, whatever? I'm curious.
Absolutely, yeah. I would say now, as far as a relocation strategy, I don't think it's quite as necessary, because I think you can make those sort of preliminary, sort of primary networking moves online on socials, and on different these platforms, on the aforementioned platforms.
Yeah.
But what I would also say is, because Canada, when we're talking about the sort of Black music ecosystem and landscape, because it's so it's not nearly as developed. It's nowhere near what it is in the United States. Again, I would place it at perhaps 10, 15 years behind. And I can walk you through what I mean by that, because I'm on the ground. There's still this idea that once you get respect elsewhere, then your own hometown is going to have work opportunities waiting for you. All right.
What's that proverb? A prophet is not respected in his hometown. Is that the idea?
That's facts. That's a time honored. That saying has been around, and it is a proverb since Jesus. You know what I mean? Like, now the thing is, that sounds ass backwards. This idea of I have to go elsewhere to get respect in my own hometown, in my own city, that it sounds ass backwards. But then again, in many parts of Canada, we are pretty ass backwards when it comes to supporting Black music. So that's how it feels here in 2022 with a lot of musicians. They're kind of like saying, hey, and even a lot of our success stories too, right? It's not like they were I wouldn't say they're exactly byproducts. Like a lot of our people who have had success outside of Canada that happen to be Black and of African descent, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're the products of a supportive, nurturing industry that played them on radio, that provided, what I mean? Outside of getting grant monies, I would say not so much.
Right.
And I would also say too, Andrew, from a, I think the important thing is, and it's maybe, people in Manitoba, Toronto, Ontario, it doesn't matter. But, when you hang out in the US, what you see, from a quantitative standpoint, from a quantitative standpoint, I think in Canada, Black music executives, like people in positions of authority, decision-making authority, they're so few and far between here. And that can be a bit deflating, right? If you're coming up in the game as an R&B artist, you're doing some electronic-based music, hip hop. So I think it's good for the soul. It's good for the spirit to spend a bit of time elsewhere where they're, it's kind of like the saying, if you see it, you can be it. So me working with .com companies in the United States in the early 2000s, Urban Box Office, IndiePlanet.com, and writing for a bunch of magazines out there, I just saw a bunch of young people that look like me that were making moves. that they'd owned real estate. They were bosses, so I like to mimic and try some of my mentees to and more emulate that. You know what I mean? As far as
Right.
entrepreneurism, as far as controlling your destiny, because there's a lot of that going on there. Here, I don't, not so much.
I'm actually curious, and I'm going to take you up on it because you mentioned like you could go on about sort of what's missing. I'm very curious. Like obviously you've touched on a few things, but I'm genuinely curious to hear a little bit more. Like yeah, why do you feel this way? What is missing? What do we got to get to?
Yeah. I mean, we have to. I think we're, here's the thing, Andrew. We're still, okay, here's the thing. I'm going to give you a little anecdote. Like in Canada, we're in 2022. We're still celebrating firsts. You know,
Mm,
so we'll see announcements out here 2021. Hey, this is the first Black A&R director. This is the first Black marketing director. So that's cool. That's a cool thing. Perhaps it's better to have one, the first of something than nothing. All right.
yeah. Yep.
But you'll also have to understand that that because I've been working with the U.S. media and music since the 90s. So I've already seen this 25 years ago. All right.
All
So
right.
I,
Yeah.
from if you attended the BET Awards, Soul Train Award, like Black excellence is an everyday thing in America. It's not this sort of singular moment, to kind of say,
Right.
hey, we have a first Black show, like I'd been to Black shows 20 years ago. You understand?
Right. Yeah.
So it's also perspective and context is everything.
Right.
I would also say that I think in Canada, I think what we need to get beyond, because these are more solutions based things. I think when it comes to one thing I see out here, which is it's very sad to me. It's a bit of a tragedy of epic proportions. Is when we talk like hiring initiatives.
Yeah. Right.
In Canada, they're boy, like new hiring initiatives are very important because they are what can really change the structure and focus of an institution, of companies, rather major labels, booking agencies and what have you. But Andrew, honestly, like promoting one Black staffer, kind of like a token in your organization, and then thinking that that's going to sort of like wipe away 45 years of anti-Black racism. That's just not the answer. We have to get used to doing things like cluster hires, because
Mm,
out here, post George Floyd, we see some activity happening out here. One Black person gets a promotion in a company of a couple hundred, and we're all sort of rah rah. But again, me sort of working using kind of more the American frame of reference, where there can be more than one Black person. There could be a cluster of people, getting what I mean, the opportunities
yeah.
for promotions and this type of thing, right? And
100%.
yeah. So I think so it's a whole I have a whole
Hmm.
I also I probably arguably have a slightly more aggressive approach to how to
Right.
level the playing field for Black people in Canada.
Right.
Because one thing about journalists, Andrew, is we look at hard data, stats. We look at the
Hmm.
facts, just the facts, ma'am. So we're always looking at real measures of equality, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So political, economic, social. So that's what we do. And what I would say in 2022, in most areas of the music industry in Canada, we're still very Black people are still very much woefully underrepresented. You know what I mean? Let me ask you a question, Andrew. We were just talking off air about you guys doing shows in Germany. Okay,
Yeah.
how do artists in Canada, how do you generate money if you're a musician? How do you generate money? How do you make money?
Well, I mean, it's touring, right? I think like some of the biggest ways is touring, and then you hope to get some sync or some sort of opportunity to make money off of your music itself. Not necessarily selling physical records. Obviously, you can sell physical records at your shows, but it's really about getting your music, played on getting sync placements, getting publishing opportunities, that sort of thing. So I would say that the two obvious places for me is probably touring, and the second to that is sync or making money off of your music online.
Okay, great. So let's talk touring just for a couple minutes. Now, you do generate some of the lion's share of your revenues if you're an artist from doing shows. Okay, that's just
Yeah.
a cold hard fact across the board. Doesn't even matter what you do. Rap, R&B, soul, electronic music doesn't matter. To be
Right.
honest, country, folk, pop, rock, indie rock, punk, classical, opera, blues, right? We can go on
Yeah.
and on, right? So-called world music. It's doing shows, all right, and also in things like merchandise and brand alignments. Now, so how many, and why I'm saying this? So you just give you some, like, how many black artists in Canada have like certified booking agents,
Sure.
that have
Yeah.
booking agents that are attached to booking agencies, booking
Yeah.
agents, so that you're able to get those shows and those tour dates. Tour Canada, tour North America. It's tiny. It's minuscule. Okay,
Hmm.
and that's how you generate the lion's share of your revenue.
Right.
Another thing, because I worked as a music presenter, as far as producing concerts for years, and I still do, sort of part-time basis, my rap and roll company, myself, my partners, booking agents, right? How many black
Hmm.
booking agents are there in Canada? From last I heard, I think there was one. Last I heard. So yeah, that is it's so when I see, so when you look at the hard facts, Andrew, it's not kind of how we feel. We feel good about Canada. That's a great country. I was born here. I love Canada. I'm like, go Canada, go Toronto Maple Leafs, Toronto Blue Jays, Raptors, yeah, blah blah yada yada. But when you look at the cold hard facts as far as representation in areas that that are attached to revenue generation, which is something we should all be thinking about, it's very grim. So I'm here to be the change. I don't want to sit here and whine and complain, but I just need to, we need to state some of the facts as well, not run away from the facts.
Yeah, there's undeniable holes in infrastructure that need to be fixed and plugged, and whether it's through hiring at some of the major players, because then you will see a little bit of trickle down that way, or whatever it is, there needs to be changes, obviously. So yeah, I'm 100% there with you. I think
Yeah,
one
Andrew, I want you to get paid. This
of
conversation
course,
here is,
yes,
and anyone tuning in, I want you all to get paid, man. I said I grew up in a, proudly Jamaican household, and there's this iconic historical figure, Marcus Garvey, and he's like, before the term serial entrepreneur, he's just about, just about boss moves, you know what I mean, about revenue generation, diversify your revenue streams, be able
yeah,
to pay your bills and support your family. So I'm coming from that place, in Toronto. It's funny, Andrew, in Toronto we have this situation. There's this young reporter of Caribbean descent, Patricia Jaggernoth, and she it's a big story out here, and she works in the media. She's a weather person, and she just resigned, you know what I mean? And she was saying that the company she worked for, they weren't, they kept her as a freelancer, and weren't paying her properly, they weren't giving her any opportunities to advance her career, because she was saying it's anti-black racism. And she's essentially learning the hard way, that there's no security, in working in certain environments, and in having a boss. There's no security in that. You know what I mean? So you can get fired any day. You know what I mean? Like Marcus Garvey, these are things that predate me. You know what I mean? Like, as far as history, as far as entrepreneurial moves, man. Like, you work at these corporations, you can get let go any day, and
right,
degraded and escorted out of the building by security, right? That's not where you want to be in 2022,
right. Yeah, I mean, so one thing that kind of goes to my mind is like we could talk about sort of the holes or what's missing all day, but I think this is also, I think, a unique point in sort of the history of Black music in Canada, right? Like, I think if you look at Toronto, um, Drake might be the biggest artist in the world right now. You know what I mean? The Weekend is damn near close. I think this is like a very unique point for Black music in Canada. And I want to talk to you a little bit about this, because you're kind of the world's leading expert on Drake in a lot of ways. You've written books about it. You teach classes on both Drake and The Weeknd. So I'm curious. I'm curious to just hear your thoughts on, like, how did we get to this point where Drake is the biggest artist on the planet, like, to the point where you can teach a class on the guy, and his music or his influence is felt on almost every song in the top 10, top 20 in the world. I'm curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, here's the thing. As far as, I do teach a course at Toronto Metropolitan University, and it's called Deconstructing Drake and The Weeknd. And one of the reasons, if I'm to be honest, I mean, I've spent many years since 2009 lecturing about Black music at many different universities across North America, and I'm sort of a part of this sort of hip hop education movement as well. And this movement involves using hip hop pedagogy in classrooms, in the post-secondary institutions and high schools at the upper years. But here's the thing with Drake and The Weeknd: they are two of the top 6 artists on the planet as far as penetration, stream, sales, all of that, right? In the world, okay, like
right, yeah,
in The Weeknd, all right. So so here's the thing: if that's not aspirational, I don't know what it is, right? So while I started out kind of talking about this sort of doom and gloom scenario, on the flip side, there's some incredible things coming out of Canada and even Toronto in particular. Now, here's the thing: just from a racial prism, I mean, look at it this way: if these 2 Black dudes who are both born and bred in Toronto, all right, and they both came from single parent households, all right, they both dropped out of high school. Okay, although Drake went back to get his equivalent of GED, as we'd say. If they can become 2 of the top 6 artists in the world, all right, across music genres, why can't you? Right? Both Drake and The Weeknd, they grew up and hung out in the same neighborhoods that we all did, right? Okay. So anything, so this idea around this sort of mentorship piece, if you see it, you can be it. I mean, if those 2 guys aren't aspirational, I don't know what else is, right? Because we talk about this trope, and that's their story, right? And we talk about this a bit in the class. Yeah, they're from single parent households. They're born and bred in Toronto. Okay, dropped out of high school, the whole thing there, and they're both on their way to becoming billionaires. They will be billionaires in the coming years for sure.
Right?
Okay, billionaires, not multi-millionaires, because they're both worth hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So now the thing is, what I would say about Drake and The Weeknd, I mean, the one thing we can learn from the Drake and The Weeknds of the world is clearly they're doing something. There's something that's making these particular artists stand out from the pack of thousands of rappers and R&B and pop singers out there from Canada, right?
Correct.
Like, are they doing things a little differently? Absolutely, they are, right? So in the course, I try to we talk about entrepreneurism. So they're serial entrepreneurs, no different than myself, but on steroids. Is that they understand the business of the music business, right? To be able to accumulate that much wealth, they would have had to be shrewd business persons and have very strong business acumen, right? So that's the real story of Drake and The Weeknd. It's the business behind Drake and The Weeknd. That's the part that most excites me. But also I'm going to tie this back into literature. I mean, in one section of the course, with Drake in particular, we spent some time deconstructing his lyrics. Because what people tend to forget about Drake is, that he's a really good writer. Okay, despite having dropped out of high school, he has his high school diploma now. So in his rhymes, he employs a lot of the literary devices that people that study English literature, writers, good MCs. I grew up listening to Rakim, you know what I mean, Big Daddy Kane, and they were employing a lot of the literary devices you learn in English literature. You understand, right? Similes, metaphors, all that stuff, iambic pentameters, right? He's employing all those things, right? So I like to talk a lot about that too.
I mean, I think it's like interesting when you think of Drake and The Weeknd. I mean, it's always like with any scene, I think they're built on the shoulders of giants, right? I think a lot of times it's like they got to a place that they got to because of everybody that put the work in before them, So like I'm curious to hear a little bit about the background, obviously from your historian hat, because it's like a lot of that, I imagine, there were building blocks that came, the amino acids that came together to create the protein that is Drake or is The Weeknd happened well before they showed up on our scene. What were the building blocks that kind of got us to this point?
Yeah, totally. I mean, they are. It's interesting. There was a concert in Toronto. It was called the All Canadian North Stars as part of OVO Weekend.
Yeah,
and it was Drake's attempt and his Drake and his handlers their attempt to shine some light and attention.
What do you think of that, by the way? I'm curious.
Of the show.
Yeah,
of the show. Yeah, I mean, I think good intent. It was a lot of fun seeing some of the oldies up there on stage. Seeing Choclair perform again, and Socrates, right? Certainly, Mishi Me, who flew in from Jamaica to do a set. And so it was, it's great intent. I mean, I think something what might have got lost in the translation is the show was called All Canadian North Stars, but it wasn't a national. It wasn't a celebration of national, um, you know, uh, as far as hip hop excellence. It was more like a very regional, very provincial. So I
Right.
so I heard some murmurs from certainly Black music practitioners outside of Toronto,
Right.
perhaps even in Winnipeg, from where elsewhere, that it's not an all Canadian North Stars. It's more a show, which we knew what it was. It's more things that influenced Drake. You know what I mean? That influenced him. But
Yeah.
I think in the branding, if you call something all Canadian, that means national.
Yeah. I mean,
And
the
then
tough the tough thing about that is though, like who else do you add to the list, right?
yeah, yeah.
Which is
Well,
like,
well,
and I'm
there were some glaring omissions. I mean, let's keep it real. You know what I mean? There were some glaring omissions, and that might be on the one hand because those musicians were Drake was not influenced by those particular musicians, so they didn't end up there. I would cite Ghetto Concept, for example. That's
true.
one of the
Get a
greatest.
concept.
That's one of the
Yeah.
greatest rap groups. I mean, they're incredible. As far as the hardcore hip hop heads love their materials.
Yeah.
And they also won the Juno Awards as well. Because I used to
Yeah.
work with them. I used to write bios for them. They won back-to-back Juno Awards.
Yeah. They're
So they
incredible.
captured the imagination of both the streets and the boardrooms. So they weren't on the bill. There's a group called Dream Warriors.
Yep. Dream
Okay, so
Warriors.
they're one of the seminal hip hop groups in Canada that
They're out of, were they out of Toronto or are they out of?
yeah, they're out of Toronto. Yeah, Dream
Yeah.
Warriors, but they weren't on the lineup. So there's some glaring omissions as far as, so it's
Yeah,
not
there was definitely some
yeah,
big
the
names.
show is not a historical piece that way at all.
Mm.
But it was a great attempt. It was a great intent for sure, I would say. And then seeing it was interesting actually. Sean Desmond, I think his show, he had one of the best shows, which was a surprise to me and a lot of my friends. Like Sean Desmond, he's like a pop artist, from Toronto. His show, as far as his actual show, it sort of trumped that of some of the other of the rap artists that performed that night. But anyways, that's my feelings on it. I think it was a great great gesture as far as just basically for Drake and his camp to kind of say, hey, our success did not come in a vacuum, and there are all these artists that you should know about that sort of predate what I'm doing.
What we've done. Yeah.
Yeah. And then some of the sets too were, some of the sets, they get a bit sloppy too, like Chaos.
Yeah.
He's a guy. I think, he's a, he has a great catalog, but his set was a little bit sloppy in my humble opinion. But then Cardinal Official, I think he saved the day because when we talk about flag waving, like now it's cool to be from Canada. Like I'm pro Toronto, pro Canada. It's cool now because of the success of Tory Lanez and The Weeknd and Drizzy. But Cardinal was doing that before it was sexy and saleable to be into Canada. So that's why everybody in Canada should give him props. Yeah, he was basically flag waving. I'm from Toronto. He's recorded songs about how we speak here. Bacardi slang, T.O. He's had all these Toronto anthems. But he was doing it. You have to respect people like that are doing it before it becomes this sort of trendy, sexy, saleable thing. You see what I mean, though?
Totally. Yeah.
So you have to respect that. Not the bandwagoners who are like, oh, I love Toronto now. No, he was saying that when it wasn't so cool to be from Toronto or Canada.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
So it's great. So Cardinal, he's a friend. He's a client. He's a good friend of mine. And but he needs to get the proper respect, I'd say, right? Because it's easy now to say, hey, Winnipeg is the greatest. But were you saying that 10 years ago when nobody cared about Winnipeg, Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of back to like the original question, when you talk about like Shoulders of Giants, does it start with him? Does it start before him? Are there other things that happened well in advance of even him that should be mentioned?
Yeah. Here's the thing. I think, at the show too, I think, Socrates, he's one of the greatest, musicians out of here, period.
Oh,
from a qualitative standpoint,
absolutely.
Not so much about record sales or scans or streams or anything like that, but as far as from the quality of his music, he is definitely one of the most underappreciated in the history of Canadian music, I would say. But when he did his show on stage, he kind of referenced this idea of, I think, Drake borrowing, some of the ideas, this idea of being a rapper and singer, vocalizing, harmonizing, doing the R&B sort of hip hop kind of fusion thing. That he was one of the first people from out here to be doing that, and also Chaos. So I think there are a lot of theories, a lot of theories, some unfounded, some that are based in fact, hard facts, actual factuals around Drake, borrowing some ideas to develop and build his sound.
Yeah, right.
So that's one thing. This idea of he was singing, a lot of his early material, singing and rapping, and so there were people here doing that, sort of pioneering that in Canada,
Right.
well before Drake started doing it, right? So
Right.
Chaos, Socrates was doing it. So that's one thing, right?
Hmm.
And then also too, I think the strong influence. We opened up this conversation talking about culture. Toronto being this hotbed of Caribbean and Caribbean culture and Jamaican culture in particular, identity and culture and language. And so you see a lot of that bleed into, a lot of Drake and OVO's outputs.
Right.
Obviously, the very strong influence of Jamaican culture in
Yeah.
the way he speaks, the way, what I'm saying, some of his rhymes, his lyrics, super strong influence. And even some influence as far as the East African culture, Habesha, what I'm saying, Ethiopian,
Yeah.
Eritrea,
Yeah.
Somali. Yeah, you're seeing East African influence. So yeah, so you're always a product of, your surroundings, right? This kind of, you learn through osmosis. I think Drake has learned through osmosis. There's little bits of East African influence, and he says
Right.
some of the slang from that community, from East, the East African community, the Jamaican community, and all of that. And then the singing, rapping, the Socratesisms, So I think when you blend that all together, and then it's like presto, voila, Drake.
Yeah, I mean, I always found Toronto has a lot of similarities to London in my opinion, music wise, right? Like it's just it kind of has developed this. There's artists that are just enormous in Toronto, right? And they've kind of become a part of the scene, right? And you even see Drake is borrowing from some of these like younger artists that are coming up and you know make like building this into what it is. And then you look at the grime scene in London, I feel like there's so many similarities between that too, right? Like I
Yeah.
mean you
That's what
I
well, good. That's what's really smart, forward-thinking, progressive artists do, because they understand something. In publicity in the world, I work. It's we call it new audience development. You know,
Mhm.
so it's very easy to sort of what they say, preach to the choir. Or stay in your
Right.
stay siloed in your own silo. But Drizzy is he's masterful, and his camp at if there's a new wave, right? He's there, and he's going to collaborate, do features with artists that are a part of those new waves. You know what I mean? And that's called in my world, it's just new audience development. Right?
Mm.
So he is
Mhm.
he is masterful at that. So if dance hall is popping right now, or Afro beats, right, or grime, right, or drill, or trap, or whatever, he's going to be doing collaborations with artists that represent those respective subgenres of rap music, and he's been doing
Mm.
that consistently, right, for many
Right.
years. Yeah, many years
Absolutely.
with,
I
with
love
much
that.
with much success.
With much success. Like yeah, more success than maybe anybody, really, honestly.
Yeah.
Um I'm kind of curious a little bit to bring it back to sort of you. Is there is there a favorite artist that you've worked with? Is there has there been a standout, someone that you're like, yeah, that's on my mantle?
Right, right. Um, yeah, that would be comparable to asking me. I have two children. What's my favorite child? You know what I'm saying? So I don't know if I could quite answer that question, but I would say, working with people that have, a big vision. They like a larger,
Mm,
like they're thinking outside of Canada. They're thinking, world domination. They have a more global view on
right.
music. I think I'm more partial towards. So they're
Got you.
thinking less provincially. So I've been attached to some artists that have that quite understand that, and even some even more
Yeah.
eclectic artists. Maylee Todd, she's in LA. She signed to Stone's Throw, and
Right.
yeah, what we begin to appreciate the most. I got to be honest, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Please.
know, uh, you know, people that work in public relations, publicists, PR folk, we act as a gateway between artists and your favorite media outlets. Okay, so
Right.
and a lot of musicians in Canada don't quite understand that quite yet, but that's why we're out there doing workshops and just trying to give away some free information, right?
Yeah.
So that you can have, like, artists that are doing well in America and elsewhere. They always have, this idea of a booking agent, a manager, and a publicist, right? And so
Got you.
without that holy trinity, your ceiling is going to be just is so incredibly low. You know what I mean,
Right.
right? And then the artists that get that, that are able to retain the services of my company or others, that's how they end up on all the big blogs, doing all the television, all the big radio interviews, all the podcasts, all the newspapers, all the magazines. Like, so either you get it or you don't, right?
Right.
But what I would say is, yeah, you know what? There's some wow, we're working on some great projects right now. Woo, okay, and I can't even answer that question. I'm gonna tell people could just go check me out on Instagram or something. Dalton Higgins.
Right.
I try to put some little, some ideas, some people I've worked with in my company, and yeah, they've done pretty significant things. Let's just say,
in time they will see it.
Yeah, for sure, totally.
Okay, well, I say I'm an artist. I want to leave some people with some things, right? So I'm an artist. I'm looking for a PR person to help me put out my next project. I hear the name Dalton Higgins. What do I need to come to you with? Like, how do I make sure that I am in the right position to work with a Dalton Higgins or any PR person?
Yeah, totally. Well, for one, I would say that you'd have to build. Okay, for one, it sort of begins and ends with the music, right? So with in public relations, so a lot of the stuff that comes to me, if I'm to be perfectly honest, the vast majority, we have to decline, and that's it could be, or how about this? I'm going to give you a better answer, Andrew. I mean, I think we have to be able to sell your product. Okay, so there has to be something within what you're doing that we can sell. All right, so what I'll share with you is some of the most successful media campaigns we've managed. It's not even so much with artists that I personally, think are the greatest artists out there in Canada or the world, right?
Right.
But they're ticking off a bunch of boxes, right?
Right.
The music is great. Perhaps they have some sort of aesthetic, some sort of look. They're handling their socials, right? There's a bunch of other things happening there, right?
Yeah.
Their music is does not rate a 10 out of 10 for me, but rates more like a 7.
Right.
But there are a bunch of other things happening. One important thing I would say, Andrew, is a story. There's a narrative. We have a story to tell, right? What a lot of editors and producers and content producers that are working, in television, radio, newspapers, magazines, blogs, podcasts, what they're looking for is interesting stories. They're looking for interesting stories. What's your backstory? What's your narrative? Because if you're getting flooded, think about this. If you're working at the Fader or you're working at Pitchfork and you're getting flooded, inundated with queries from hundreds and thousands of artists weekly, so what are the separators? What are the things that are going to separate you from those 622 other submissions they received this week, right?
Right.
All things considered, like let's say the music, it's pretty even Steven, Sally. So what is it that's going to separate you? Why? For me to cover your art, for me to review your record, for me to do a preview piece, want to interview you, right? Get some stuff happening on socials. What are those separating pieces? So a lot of the times it's just your story. What's your story? Why are you doing this? The who, what, when, where, why, how. It has to be compelling. It has to be profound, right? If you think about a lot of the musicians you are listening to today, think about their stories, think about there's a story there. There's something else to dive into, to sink your teeth into outside of making hot beats and rhymes, right? That's what I'd say. I'd also say too, as far as having some command of social media, because it is 2022. So if you don't have a sort of built-in, I wouldn't say cult following, but if you haven't spent any time engaging, like by your lonesome, without my assistance, without my involvement, a little, some like as far as you're, on Spotify, on the DSPs, as far as socials, Instagram, TikTok for sure, I would be a bit hesitant as well, because again, yeah, you have to. We're doing, it's contemporary culture, so you have to be kind of, I think, in my humble opinion, a little bit on those platforms to start to make things move. And here's the thing, Andrew. Just to give you the correlation, like a lot of artists, they ask me to say, how do I get verified on Instagram or Twitter, or get verified on social media? And there's a direct correlation, between media, like generating media, and the verification process, right? Like that's what it is. Like people that are looking to verify you, they want to know that you're out there in the media. You know what I mean? You're getting picked up on Pitchfork and Fader and whatever, Winnipeg Free Press, whatever, CBC Radio. that's how they verify you, right? So that's where the publicists come into play. So if we generate a lot of media for you, that's essentially what the people that do the verification services at on Meta, Meta, which owns Instagram, that's what they're looking for. It's the first thing they're looking for, right? And even with DSPs too, Andrew, you probably know this, but like if you want to get on playlists and what have you, like they're looking to see what artists are generating media attention. There's a direct correlation. Because if you're not out there, if they're looking on search engines and you're not showing up on the CDC or Exclaim newspaper or whatever, you're not going to get. It's going to be very difficult to get on those playlists, right? So, yeah. So that's where public relations comes in. I try to strip it down to its core. Yeah.
That's awesome. So then, how about if me as a journalist, I'm gonna quit music. I want to get into journalism. How do I go about it?
Yeah. How do you go about it? I'm of the school of thought. I'm going to reference Miles Davis again. I think those who do, you study it. To be honest, right? There's a lot of very mediocre journalists out there, and they don't last too long. I've been doing this a couple decades because I'm not only did I cut my teeth as far as volunteerism, but I'm also formally trained. So I'm of the school of thought. Miles Davis was always saying, hey, you can have self-taught musicians, and then you could have musicians that can't teach themselves, but they study at Juilliard or they go to, a school of music, Humber College of Music in Toronto, or wherever. I'm one of those people that I believe if you're able to combine those two elements, so take a course on reporting, journalism 101. They're not costly. You can do a degree as well if you're, if you're into that type of thing. But I think you have to study the craft and study the masters.
Right.
And then you have that natural affinity towards writing, like you were just a good writer naturally, and you combine those two elements. Those are typically a lot of the times the best writers, But I don't think you can just there are a lot of writers, they don't last too long, man. You know what I mean? Like here's the thing, Andrew. I've written 6 books. A couple are bestsellers, and when we talk about even economics, I got passive income, bro. Like what I mean? Because I studied the craft. I took my time to take those necessary courses. In addition to, grinding it out as far as, the whole self-taught thing. I have my own style. I have my own lane. So those are I think personally, those are the writers, the journalists that tend to stand the test of time and are able to generate revenue and make some good money to feed their family. A lot of journalists, they flame out, bro. They just kind of like, hey, I'm writing a couple blogs and freelancing and making very little money. It's because they don't know the craft. They don't know the industry. I did a 2-year diploma in publishing, bro. You see what I mean? So I can better understand the skeleton, the structure, the blueprint, the template of publishing, the publishing industry in Canada. That's why I've written 6 books, and others are still in my age struggling to get out there first. I studied the game, bro. I studied the craft. Yeah.
Right. So that's a big thing. Go learn it. Legitimately.
Go study with the masters. Go study with the masters. Mentorship, OGs, right? If you don't have that at your disposal, a course of study, right? But there should be some sort of formal structure to what you're doing. We're not free. This is not a freestyle competition. Your life is not one big freestyle, Andrew.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? There has to be some structure to it. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, with that, we have about 2 minutes left. You kind of dropped a few gems that I think are important to everything. We talked about mentors. We talked about study or go and learn. Is there anything else, like if you had to sort of build the building blocks of getting where you want to go? Is there anything else that somebody would need to sort of have in their toolkit or need to know that they should be doing or thinking about?
Yeah. Well, one thing is making those connections outside of moving outside of your province, your city. Have a more global perspective. I was a music presenter for years and had an opportunity to travel many parts of the globe, and there you have tribe members around the world, people that think like you, that look like you, that speak like you, that talk like you, that rhyme like you, that make beats like you, but they may not be here, right? They may be in Essen, Germany. They might be in Sevilla, Spain, right? They may be in Copenhagen, Denmark, right? So I think it's important to do that. And I would also say, back to, we started this entrepreneurism. I think we have to now be thinking, more as entrepreneurs. I think the reason, like the program we have at Toronto Metropolitan University, it's sort of catered towards people that are more entrepreneurial, because we want to. I think it's very important. The whole sort of broke artist trope. It's not something that excites me too much. I'm more, if I'm to be perfectly honest, That's why I'm referencing Marcus Garvey. So I think this idea of setting up corporations and trying to just as far as boss culture, I think that needs to be promoted more out here.
Mm,
I think that's where we lag a bit far behind. We spend a lot of time in Canada, wanting to appease those people, appease the bosses, and we need to be the bosses. Take the like I said, I had seeing Harpo Studios in Chicago. I'm giving you anecdotes, Murrow, where I said the Tyler Perry model, Issa Rae, whatever you're into. It's just like they own their stuff. So
yeah.
I think entrepreneurism, that's what we're pushing in the program, is that we're going to crank out a bunch of graduates out of the music program at Toronto Metropolitan University
Hmm.
that are coming out more with entrepreneurial minded, so they can
Right.
understand things like how to passive income, diversified revenue streams, diversified revenue streams, and things like where you could actually pay your bills, buy a condo, buy a house, if you have children, feed your family. That's the stuff that more excites me now, to be perfectly honest.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's like there's this idea for a lot of people that's like, I don't want to sell out. I just want to, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, it's like, if you want to keep making your art, you know, you could go and get that job, the 9 to 5 job, or you can do this, right? And find ways to make it work for yourself or work in creative industries. Um, but yeah, it's not selling out to keep doing your art or your craft. Um,
No, no, no. You got to bet on yourself, man. Risk taking, risk taking. You got to spend money to make money. So that's another thing. And
Absolutely.
vis-a-vis grants, Factor Canada, Canada Council for the Arts, because I've been on all juries for all of these bodies, and I got to tell you, get those applications in there. One benefit of being in Canada is you can sort of get a lot of grant monies to help to to develop your art and your craft. So take full advantage. Is what I would say. Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah. I mean, that's sort of our time, Dalton. It flew by for me. I don't know if it flew by for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
But man, this was great. Incredible opportunity to speak with you. You dropped a lot of gems. I learned a lot from you. Um, I definitely hope we can do this again, man.
Yeah, no, totally, yeah. And anybody out there, just if you reference Andrew, just hit me up on the gram. The only place now I'm retrieving, because I have just too many pages where I'm like on Instagram, like everywhere. I got to be honest, even from Facebook, like the oldies and Twitter, like, and people, they're DMing me all the time, and because I
Right.
work in education, but I actually work in the music industry, people are asking questions all the time, sliding in my DMs. The people tuning in tonight, they can slide up in my DMs. Just reference Andrew, all right? And I will respond promptly. I'm happy to give free advice, information. That's why I'm here. Information is to be shared. I'm not
Right.
in Toronto. You have all of these older gatekeepers, and they don't want to share information with 20 somethings, teenagers, people younger than me. I want to share. I want to give away free
Right.
information. I want them to thrive and succeed. So that sometimes that's not the tenor out here. Guys are and gals are gatekeepers. They don't want to share information, or they're or they say this thing, your idols become your rivals. Like I just hear this weird
Right.
stuff. No, I want
Yeah.
I want emerging, burgeoning talents that happen to be Black and of African descent to succeed. Okay,
Right.
I'm a Garveyite, so I want you to succeed. So hit me up on socials, on Instagram, Dalton Higgins 5, and but reference Andrew, all right? Because a lot of people hit me up there, total unsolicited queries that will go unreturned, and not I'm not replying to them, but just reference Andrew and Manitoba Music, and I'll holler back for sure. I'm happy to share
Amazing.
resources, whatever.
Amazing. There you go. Free game, guys. Reach out. So just a few thanks. Big thank you to Factor for making BPM Speaker Series possible. I want to thank Black History Manitoba for partnering with us on this. Thanks to Advance for supporting BPM and the series all together. So if you don't know about Advance, you can check them out on their website. It's just advancemusic.org. If you go to right on the front page, there's an opportunity for you to join. It just says become a member. Click on that and follow the prompts, and you're able to join. If you're interested in joining BPM, you can email us. You can reach out to me personally. You can go onto the Manitoba Music website and just type in BPM. Something will come up. Reach out to anyone at Manitoba Music, and we can have you be part of this group. We'd love to have you. Yeah, be sure to check out some of our other segments. So we have a segment with Which Prophet, as well as Vivian Barclay on YouTube and Facebook. So go check those out. Lots of great information. Other gems have been dropped on those, so definitely worth your time. And make sure that you check out the BPM playlist. So every month there is a Black professional in music playlist featuring some of the best Black artists in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So go on the playlist, check it out, follow some of these artists, and enjoy yourself. And with that, thank you again, Dalton. This was incredible. Thank you for everyone for watching us. Thank you, Factor. Thank you, Black History Manitoba. With that, we're out.